Hi, my name is Steven and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how to start a side hustle, the pros and cons of having a short-term rental. So today, as part of my side hustle series, I'm going to be talking to you about the pros and cons of having a short-term rental, or in this case, an Airbnb. I currently use platforms for short-term rentals such as Airbnb, VRBO, and now the defunct Homeaway. But this review is really going to be focused on the aspects of having a short-term rental, the pros and cons of it as a side hustle. So I'm going to focus my attention on that and not so much the platforms that I've used. So I got into this side hustle because of a confluence of different things. I had an interest in tiny houses at the time, I wanted to dip into rental properties, and I also wanted to make some extra money on the side. And for me, having a tiny house Airbnb was just an easier way rather than spending a lot of money on actually buying a property. And I really got into this because I wanted the prospect of having a passive income stream. So today I'm going to be talking to you about why I started a short-term rental using a tiny house Airbnb and what are some of the pros and cons of having this short-term rental. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, hit that notification bell if you like this content. And here we go. So first, let's talk about why I started a side hustle with short-term rentals. So having rental properties is a great way to earn lots of money as a side hustle. So after reading a lot about rental properties and the passive income stream, I decided to give it a go in 2017. Now I had a big problem. I didn't have enough capital to buy a down payment on a house. And being in a very high cost of living area, this was very problematic. I wanted to have a rental property, but with low starting costs. So after learning about tiny houses, I realized that this was a perfect opportunity to buy something on the cheap. I got in touch with a tiny house builder, and luckily enough, they were also renting their tiny house on Airbnb. So I learned a lot about the potential income stream coming from a tiny house Airbnb, and I thought this was a fantastic business opportunity. So some of the benefits of this tiny house was that it was significantly cheaper than a real house, and also it was mobile. You can take it anywhere you want. Because in short-term rental properties, locations matter. So I signed a contract with them to build a house, and 6 months later, I had my tiny house. And here it is. I'll put a link down in the description below so you can see my Airbnb listing. So from the eventual guidance of the home builders, I was very optimistic that my tiny house will make a lot of money. And spoiler alert, it really didn't. Although it was mostly due to the location I put it in. So now let's talk about some pros of a short-term rental. Listing the house was incredibly easy on all the platforms that I've used. There wasn't any issues uploading photos, writing descriptions, or putting down all the amenities in your house. That part was relatively simple. And bookings were incredibly easy to get in the beginning. Because your listing is new, all the platforms really pushed your listings to the top. So you would get that first burst of guests coming to your house. Also, the money was very good in the summer months. Because Seattle is known for its summers, I had a lot of bookings for summer travelers going hiking, water sports, and various mountain activities. Although because of my location, which was closer to the mountains, wintertime wasn't necessarily that good. And so I really got the benefit of it being more of a cabin than an Airbnb in the city. And another pro is that when you have the house all ready to go and set up, it is incredibly easy to maintain it. If things are working well, everything runs pretty smoothly. If you have supplies that are easily replenishable, like if you purchase it on Amazon and have it next day shipped, and then all the things that you need for the house are basically one-time purchases. So you really just need to buy it once and then forget about it. And in the long run, if your house is consistently managed well, you can get those 5-star ratings pretty easily. And then if you have an overall rating of 4.8 and above, you'll become a superhost on the Airbnb platform. That gives your listing an extra boost to people. And once you have a lot of 5-star ratings, you can then start to increase your nightly rate, so you can charge at a higher premium. And lastly, one of the biggest pros is that you can meet incredible people. Throughout the 3 years of managing the Airbnb by myself, I've met an incredible amount of people. And many of those people are really great to interact with. I enjoy many of the conversations, discussions, and phone calls that I've had with Airbnb guests throughout the years. And most of the time, the experience is fantastic. They love the house, they shower you with optimism and praise for the design that you had. Every time you see that review, it's a good feeling that you did the right thing by offering them a service. So I would say that 90 to 95% of the people that I've dealt with were really pleasant, and I would definitely host them again. So now let's talk about some of the cons of a short-term rental. So in the continuation from the last section, dealing with bad people. So it's a pro dealing with good people, but it's also a con dealing with bad people. And really a very small portion of those guests were terrible to deal with. Being in a customer service position like an Airbnb host, your job is to make the customer happy. And so when the guests aren't happy, they tend to be very belligerent and angry. Sometimes there's just no pleasing people. No matter what you say, what you do, or how you bend over backwards to try to help them, they will blast you for the little things and leave you a negative review. Throughout my 3 years as an Airbnb host, I've had rude, dirty, and unreasonable people come my way. Even though they were a very small minority of guests, the lasting impression they left on me caused me a lot of stress and anxiety, and made me want to quit Airbnb sometimes. So another con is dealing with house issues. I live 1.5 hours away from my Airbnb, and it was a terrible experience to go out there and fix a small problem. I've had frozen water pipes, people damaging the insides of the house, and mice on one occasion. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy because it's so terrible to try to deal with that situation by yourself. You literally have to learn how to deal with it when you're 1.5 hours away. It did nothing to smooth my stress and anxiety during those times. I was worrying about it constantly. I lost sleep over it. So definitely dealing with the house issue is one of the worst cons. And another con is backup cleaners are a must. I had a really good primary cleaner and she was wonderful. But when she wasn't available, I had to cancel bookings. There was just no other way for me to get another cleaner. I had tried for many years to get backup cleaners to help her, but all of them quit and didn't want to do the job. So I was never able to find a reliable backup cleaner that I trusted. It was very hard to get good, reliable people out that far. So one of my biggest suggestions when you're going into short-term rentals is have a professional cleaning company because you don't want to try to clean the house all the time yourself. So another biggest con is that you are always the point of contact. All the guests talk to you, the cleaners coordinate through you, and you have to resolve all the issues with the house yourself. This is very inconvenient because you can have guests asking you questions at random times during the day and night. Some of them might be simple, others might be very problematic to resolve. And many times when I was on vacation, I would have to answer house guests' questions, even when I had a significant time zone difference. I remember in one instance when my wife and I were in South Africa for 2 weeks, I had to constantly contact guests for booking questions. It drove me insane, and about a third of the trip was me thinking about Airbnb bookings. And if there was an issue with an Airbnb, I would be half a world away and I could not resolve it whatsoever. So really think about whether or not you're okay with other people to ask you random questions about the house. And lastly, a big con is that it is not passive income. Anybody that tells you having a short-term rental is passive income is not managing their own property. Because if you're managing your own property, you're doing a lot of the work. In a very naive sense, when I first started out, I thought I would be able to run a short-term rental passively. Because based on what I've heard, I just have to answer a couple of questions, deal with a few house issues, and maybe clean it myself once or twice. Based on your house and your location, you might have to put in a lot of work. For example, just like I was an hour and a half away, I could not clean the house myself. I had to rely on cleaners and backup cleaners to do the cleaning for me. So then I had to take on the challenge of coordinating all that by myself. And the other part is because I wasn't so close to my house, I had to deal with the issues far away. And so I could never just go down to Home Depot, fix this part and move on. I had to coordinate my days so that I would go take a Saturday and fix that issue. And also when you have a lot of guests and they don't know how an Airbnb works, you have to answer a lot of questions. And because it's a tiny house, not many people are used to it. So I get a lot of questions related to having a tiny house or operating in one. So here are some of my general thoughts on having a short-term rental. I still have my tiny house and it's listed on Airbnb, but it's under property management. It has been a saving grace for me. I was actually considering selling the house prior to finding this property management. And this was becoming an issue because I was having problems finding a backup cleaner. And my primary cleaner had some health issues. So I was canceling bookings left and right because I couldn't find someone to clean the house. And this was causing me a lot of stress. Enough stress to the point where if I didn't find a place for it, I would have to sell it. But the saving grace is that I found it under new property management and it has been amazing so far. And the Airbnb listing is down below in the description box, so check it out. So in its new location, I'm very hopeful for the future. And so hopefully I can keep this listing going for as long as I can. So another tip is I wouldn't spend money on Facebook or Google advertising for the house. Now I heard a lot of people suggest advertising a house on Facebook or Google AdSense would help your listings. I found out that it's more seasonal dependent, especially where I was at, versus people coming into my listings because of ads that they saw. Now it might be due to the tiny house location because it wasn't located in a city. Maybe had I had the short-term rental in a city and advertised it, it would have got more bookings. It might have had a harder time getting people outside of the city. So for me, it didn't make any sense to keep those ads running. So when you start an Airbnb or a short-term rental, be sure you're in it for the long haul. If I would have had a 6-month time horizon, I wouldn't have made any money, and even a 1 to 2 year horizon isn't enough. It took me almost a full year when I had the thought of having a tiny house Airbnb to my first dollar of profit. For me, there was no such thing as a quick buck in the Airbnb business. The upfront costs were huge, and it took a long time to get everything set up properly. One of the biggest things was I had to find a location to put the house. I had to search for 3 months before I found a good enough location for the tiny house. So if you're thinking about having a short-term rental, be sure you want to stay invested in it for at least 1 to 2 years, or else that upfront cost and that time spent would probably be a waste. And another suggestion, location, location, location. Make sure that the location that you have for your short-term rental is a good one. I had a rental that was very remote and it was very hard for people to get to. It wasn't located in the city and you had to drive a bit to get there. And people get lost easily. So you want to find a place that's very easy, off the interstate, and maybe in a city or town-like location. Lastly, I mentioned this before, but get a professional cleaning service. It will pay you many, many dividends to find a professional cleaning service that has primary and backup cleaners for you. So you don't have to scramble and cancel a booking because you couldn't find a cleaner. This was by far the most stressful of having a short-term rental. Because if you're running an Airbnb and you're doing daily bookings, it's incredibly hard to clean the house on a daily basis. Cleaners need to be cleaning the house around 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and there's a very short window to get all that work done. So really, it's in your best interest to have a professional cleaning service rather than doing it yourself. So would I do it again? Well, I still have the house now, and I still use it as a short-term rental. But the only difference now is that I have a professional management company to help run it for me. I don't think I would continue with this side hustle if I didn't have that property management service. Because at the end of the day, it was taking up too much of my time and energy, and I was really thinking about getting rid of the house. So that's my review of having a short-term rental as a side hustle. If I was being completely honest, the last 3 years when I was running my Airbnb, I would not recommend it again. It wasn't the passive income stream that I was hoping for, and it required a lot of time and energy outside of what I could reasonably put into that side hustle. It caused me a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety throughout the years. There were many cases where I was freaking out and I was paralyzed because I lost control of the situation and I couldn't fix it immediately. I was stressing over it for days and weeks while this issue was being resolved. And really, this got me to the point of me actually wanting to sell the house. But when it was running smoothly, those summer months, it was great. The money was coming in, the people were nice, and things seemed to go smoothly. But unfortunately, that happened so rarely during my 3 years that overall, it wasn't worth it. So when you're thinking about having a short-term rental, look into getting the right property, the location of the property, and whether or not you can find a good management company to take care of it for you. Because having those 3 things will increase your chances of having a successful short-term rental. So I leave you with this. Getting into short-term rentals as a side hustle has a high barrier of entry and might require a lot of upfront time and capital to get started. It's definitely not the easiest of the side hustles that I've had, but when done properly, it can provide you with substantial income. So I really recommend doing your homework before you start a short-term rental. So thank you for watching. Be sure to leave me a comment down below on whether or not you think short-term rentals are a good side hustle for you. And I'll see you next time.